Hi, friends. I just wanted you to know that anytime you have a question that you'd like me to explore on the podcast, anything around nervous system healing, relationships, or generational patterns, you can now submit it anonymously through the link in the show notes. You don't have to share any personal information unless you choose to. There's also an option to consent to be featured in a future episode for a short audio coaching conversation. If you check that box, I or someone from my team will reach out to schedule a time that feels good for you. I'd love to hear what's on your heart. Welcome to the NeuroHeir Podcast, the show for cycle breakers, parents, young adults, and helping professionals ready to understand their nervous system through a generational lens, heal what isn't theirs to carry, and consciously choose what comes next. Hi, I'm your host, Leanna Hunt, an associate clinical mental health counselor and certified performance coach. Each week, you'll get stories, science, and somatic practices, plus my signature 4N framework: notice, name, nurture, and navigate, to help you honor resilience, break silence, and build deeper connection with yourself and those you love, all while shaping a legacy of safety, freedom, and possibility. Welcome back to the NeuroHeir Podcast. Before we begin, I want to pause and name something that feels especially meaningful today, since this entire episode is all about naming. This is episode 20. 20 conversations centered around the nervous system, 20 opportunities to slow down, 20 reminders that you are not broken, but that you are adaptive. If you've been here since the beginning, thank you for walking this podcast path with me. It's been such an amazing journey so far. And if this is one of your first episodes, I'm really glad that you're here. Last week in episode 19, we deepened notice, the first of the 4 N's. We talked about sensations, early cues, and the body's patterns before the mind catches up. Today, we move into the next step of the 4 N's, which is name. Because naming helps us bring outside the body what we are experiencing inside the body. And sometimes naming alone can soften an emotion simply by acknowledging it without us having to be totally overcome by it. There's a phrase you may or may not have heard before. It is name it to tame it. This idea comes from the work of Dr. Siegel and his collaborator, Tina Payne Bryson, through their book, The Whole Brain Child. And I want to be clear about something really important too. I know I say that a lot, but I feel like everything is so important. This work is evidence-based. It's grounded in neuroscience, psychiatry, attachment research, and decades of clinical application. So when we talk about naming emotions, we're not just talking about talking it out or thinking positively. We're talking about how the brain actually organizes experiences. One of the core distinctions Siegel and Bryson introduce is the difference between surviving and thriving. And I actually really love this distinction because it fits so cleanly into generational work. There are moments and entire generations where the nervous system is and was focused solely on survival, getting through the day, staying functional, and not falling apart because life depended on it. And in those moments, the brain does exactly what it's designed to do. It prioritizes speed over reflection. It prioritizes reaction over integration, and it prioritizes protection over understanding. And remember, none of this is dysfunctional. It's actually intelligence. But thriving requires something different. Thriving requires integration. Integration is one of the most important words in Siegel's work. An integrated brain is one where different systems are allowed to communicate and cooperate instead of working in isolation or opposition. When the brain is integrated, we tend to see things like better emotional regulation, clearer decision-making, more flexibility, stronger relationships, and a greater sense of internal coherence. This is what Siegel refers to as staying in the river of well-being, not being overwhelmed by chaos on one side and not stuck in rigidity on the other. And here's one of the key NeuroHeir bridges. Naming is one of the primary ways that integration happens. Let's break that down really simply. The right side of the brain is deeply connected to emotion, sensation, imagery, and implicit memory. So when emotions feel big, fast, or overwhelming, that's often a right brain dominant experience. And the left side of the brain is more involved in language, sequencing, logic, and meaning making. So when you name what's happening, when you can put words to sensation or emotion, you're not overriding the feeling. You're bringing the left brain online to support that emotional right brain, which we kind of talked about last week with that right brain limbic center where the amygdala is and the left brain with the prefrontal cortex. This is why Siegel talks about helping kids, quote unquote, tell their story of what's happening when emotions feel big. Because storytelling is actually integration. And this is just as true for adults as it is for kids. Another important piece of naming is that it helps the nervous system feel organized. When experience stays unnamed, it often lives as raw sensation or emotion without context. And the nervous system does not like the unknown. It truly likes and does what is familiar. And when you say, this is fear, this is grief, or this is a stress response, you are starting to say, this belongs somewhere. And that alone can contribute towards your own states of regulation. The whole brain trial is written for parents to use with their children, but these tools absolutely apply to adults. What parents are taught to do for children, such as connecting emotionally, helping name experiences, supporting integration, adults can learn to do it with themselves. And remember, if this wasn't modeled for you growing up, learning to do it now is still so important. It's developmental repair. It's you giving your nervous system what it didn't have access to earlier. So through the NeuroHeir lens, name it to tame it becomes this. Naming is how we move from survival patterns we inherited into integration that we are now consciously choosing. It's how we stop being fused with a reaction and start relating to it. It's how the nervous system realizes, hey, I'm not just reacting, I'm actually aware of what's happening in my body right now. And awareness is the beginning of choice, as we've talked about before and like last week. But I want to slow that down even more because awareness is the doorway, not the destination. You can be aware that you're anxious and still feel completely overwhelmed by it. Integration is what happens after awareness, when the experience is no longer happening alone in the body. Integration means that different parts of your experience are no longer happening alone in isolation. It means sensation isn't happening without meaning, and emotion isn't happening without context, and reaction isn't happening without relationship. When you're not integrated, the nervous system is fast, it's protective, and it can feel really fragmented. Maybe it's just one part of you that reacts and then other parts that judge. And maybe another part of you wants to shut down completely. But when integration can begin, something shifts. You can feel a sensation and know what it is. You can have an emotion and stay connected to yourself. You can start to notice a reaction without having to let it overtake you. So integration isn't about stopping anxiety, but it is about bringing enough awareness, enough language, and enough presence online that the experience no longer has to take over your whole system. This is why naming matters so much, because naming is what turns a reaction into an experience you can be in relationship with. And once we start to understand naming as integration, a lot of what we call anxiety can start to make a lot more sense, especially when we remember that most of our nervous systems didn't learn these patterns in isolation. Anxiety often isn't the problem. What if anxiety is the signal that integration hasn't been available yet? Here's something I hear often from clients who come to me for anxiety. They'll say some version of, we didn't talk about emotions in my house. Feelings weren't discussed. You just avoided and pushed through, or we were told to sweep it under the rug. If that's your story or some version of your story, I want you to hear this really clearly. Not talking about emotions was not a failure. For your family for a long time, it most likely was a form of survival. Across generations, there were very real reasons to not have to feel. There was war, there was poverty, there was racial and cultural oppression, there was so much loss, and there was instability physically, financially, emotionally. So when survival is the priority, emotions can sometimes feel like a luxury that the nervous system can't always afford. So over time, the system learns to adapt. It learns to function and to move forward. And it learns that it cannot pause long enough and feel, because pausing could mean falling apart. The problem isn't that this pattern existed for you or your family. The problem is that it's continued, even when the environments have changed. And now you may be one of the first ones in your entire family noticing something different. Maybe you're noticing, I don't want to do it this way anymore. Maybe you're thinking, I want to understand what's happening inside me. And maybe you're pondering what it would be like to respond instead of just react. Remember, generational repair doesn't mean that your family has failed. It means your nervous system is now ready for something new. And naming is often one of those first places that shift begins. I want to bring you back to Sarah, the composite of many of my clients I've worked with who I introduced last episode. Sarah came in saying she had anxiety for no specific reason, but her body told a very clear story. Before our meetings, she noticed tightness in her chest, shallow breathing, racing thoughts. Once we started to slow things down so much with her nervous system, first with noticing and then with naming, Sarah started to realize something really important. She started to notice that she actually wasn't anxious all the time like she thought. What she was experiencing was a patterned nervous system response. She practiced naming in layers. First, she learned to name the sensation after she noticed it. She would name things such as, there's tightness in my chest. When she named the emotion connected to that sensation, she was able to say, this feels like a stress response. At first, the anxiety didn't disappear, but over time, with a lot of body work and a lot of awareness and a lot of practicing the 4 N's, something started to shift significantly for Sarah. Without forcing anything, Sarah noticed the anxiety calming on its own, simply through this gentle dance of notice and name. I want to add one more layer of naming here, and this is one that I think is so cool. Research by Ethan Cross shows that speaking to yourself in the third person, using your own name, improves emotional regulation. So instead of asking and pondering on with those questions for yourself, such as, why am I like this? You could try using your own name. So I'll try it with myself. It would be, Leanna, you're having a really hard moment, and that makes sense. Or Leanna, you're feeling really off. What would help you move through that right now? This creates psychological distance, not avoidance. It helps create space. That space allows the nervous system to regulate when you talk to yourself in the third person. Cross describes this as accessing your own inner coach, which I love because as I've practiced this and I've had clients practice this, it's like you're combating your own inner critic with now your inner coach just by talking to yourself in the third person. Think about how you talk to a friend who's overwhelmed. You're not dismissive to them. You're not overly critical. You don't tell them, hey, you just need to get over this. You actually help them zoom out. You try to offer perspective and you remind them of the context. That's what this language shift does internally for your system. So by naming yourself, by using your name, you're relating to yourself the way you would to someone you care about. And neurologically, this matters too. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology shows this shift helps people regulate thoughts and feelings during social stress without suppressing emotion. This is self-talk that brings the prefrontal cortex back online. Remember that logical part. So you're not just fused with the emotion, but you're still in relationship with it. And you guys, this is integration. That's regulation. Also remember this, naming is not about diagnosing yourself. Naming is not labeling yourself either as broken or something being wrong with you. And naming is not making something permanent. I want you to look at this example. So one example would be, I have anxiety. And maybe to you, that feels more like labeling when you're starting to name things in your body. If we take that one step further, that naming practice, we can deepen with language like, my nervous system is mobilizing. My nervous system is leaving its window of tolerance, and I am in a state of hyper arousal. Or instead of just saying, I have depression, noticing and naming, my nervous system feels like it's collapsing, or I am starting to shut down. Does that make sense? One can often collapse identity and keep us stuck, and the other can help restore choice. We don't name to define ourselves. We name to relate to what is actually happening internally. And relationship is what regulates. Here is a NeuroHeir reframe for parents. The most powerful way we show up for our children is through the work we do with ourselves. When you can notice your own nervous system, when you name your own stress, when you can repair internally with yourself first, you are modeling regulation, often without words. Your children don't learn emotional safety primarily from what you explain, although that is important. They are learning it also from the state you bring into the room, most importantly. Becoming a NeuroHeir isn't about parenting perfectly. Remember, hopefully you guys by now have thrown the word perfect or perfectly out the window. But this is about repair. Becoming a NeuroHeir is about repair internally and also in relationship with yourself and others. And you guys, that's how patterns change. If it feels okay, let's practice together. I want you just to place your hand somewhere grounding. For me right now, I just have a hand resting on my legs. What do you feel right now? What are you noticing in your body? Do you feel like you're more activated? Do you feel closer to shutting down? Or maybe you're just in this beautiful space of steadiness and presence. And then I want you to use your own name. So for my name, it would be, Leanna, you are allowed to feel this. This makes sense in the moment. So I want you to try that with your own name. Just tell yourself, call yourself by name and say, it is okay to feel this. Whatever you're feeling right now is okay to be here and to show up. Remember, if nothing feels like it's coming up, that's information too, because sometimes that state of collapse and shutdown is so intense, the body is not sure it can come back online and connect with you. So just keep practicing it. I have a few questions for you too. You might journal later on these, and as always, they'll be in the show notes for you to find. The first is, what sensations do I notice but maybe haven't named before? Is there a certain part of me that shows up when I leave my window of tolerance? What does this part of me believe when I leave my window of tolerance? What changes when I speak to myself with care? And then also, what helps me return to my window? Remember that naming isn't about control. It is about relationship. It's about learning how to stay with yourself instead of overriding yourself. For many of us, it's the first time the body experiences this kind of message. Does that make sense? And remember to remind yourself as often as possible when you are naming that your emotions have a place here and that they're allowed to move through you. Next episode, we're going to move into nurture, what actually helps once something has been named. Until then, you don't have to heal everything. You just have to stay in the conversation with your body. Hope you guys have a beautiful rest of your week. Until next time. Bye, guys. Thanks for joining me on the NeuroHeir Podcast. This work is about honoring resilience in yourself and also those who came before you, all while finding freedom from what was never yours to carry. With the help of stories, science, somatic tools, and the 4 N's, notice, name, nurture, and navigate, you have a path toward deeper connection with yourself, your loved ones, and the legacy you want to pass on. If today's episode spoke to you, share it with someone who's ready to step into this work too. and follow the show so you never miss an episode. Remember, you may not have chosen what you inherited, but you can choose what comes next.